Hi, I'm Thomas Bowles, Prince William County Agricultural Extension Agent. Welcome to our video.
And so when you receive that link, please fill out the evaluation so we can make any changes that we need to in the program and that we have your ideas for future programs. So Jeff, thanks for being here and go ahead.
Okay, everybody can still see the screen?
Yep.
My name is Jeff Zimmerman. I am a avid, or there's other words that my wife uses, container gardener. I've been a master gardener for a little over 10 years now. And this next group is just a series of different containers of things that I've obviously made myself and recycled. And just point to some of the reasons that I really, really enjoy container gardening. Several of the adjectives at the top: creativity, like to repurpose, the convenience, flexibility, variety, and then probably my favorite quote for containers is, to build a successful container garden is no more complicated than choosing a container, filling it with media, and planting it with plants. And that is pretty much all that you have to do as long as you follow a few basic rules. This summer, we decided to mask up, and we went to 3 of the 4 corners of the continental U.S., and this had to be my favorite container garden that I saw. This gentleman was actually from California. We saw him in Key West at Higgs Memorial Beach Park, and this was his traveling garden that he took, and house actually, that he took everywhere with him. He said he's been photographed a lot and loved that I was going to put it into a presentation, so I had to get it in there this year. It's just a fantastic example of making do of what space you have with the containers that you can easily get. Some more examples, and it's kind of my motivation here at the beginning. The top is from Huntington Botanical Gardens. It's in San Marino in LA County. And of course, they're going to be a lot more arid. And you can see the bonsai trees and the succulents, which have become one of my favorites for container gardening as well. And then the bottom actually was down the road from where our gentleman with the garden in the back of his truck was. This is actually in an old fort at the edge of the beach there. And it was been taken over by the Key West Garden Club. And you can see just some of their examples. And they had pots everywhere down there, which was really exciting for me to see. And then this last but not least, we're going to the other corner. And this is the Isabelle Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, and this is the courtyard. It's a symmetrical courtyard, but what amazed me was just the sheer number of containers that they had within this garden. Again, it's symmetrical, so the one side actually feeds back over onto the other side where my camera was coming from, and it was just truly amazing to me how many that they used as accent plants throughout this, to supplement the plantings within this fairly formal courtyard space. Which is a good segue into, why would they do that, and why would you do container gardening? And probably the number one is it's practical and efficient growing technique. You are in control of yourself, your environment, and what you do with your plants. It's flexible as to location. It works in just about any environment. You can bring the plants in, you can bring them out, you can start earlier and bring them in at night if you wish to keep them out of the cold, and so forth. So you have a lot of flexibility as to what you do. For those of you who want to do organic gardening and do vegetables, it's much easier, much fewer pests, much less weeding. I have a very large vegetable garden, and in that vegetable garden are all of my past years' pests. They're still there. All of the eggs are overwintering now, even though I try to clean up. The cucumber beetles come back every year and so forth. You don't really have that kind of problem when you do containers. It accommodates seasonal changes, and another great one, especially if you like annuals. Being able to swap out between really the 4 seasons. You can even go to ornamental cabbages and so forth in the winter times, which make it do fairly well. You can have containers pretty much all year long, depending on what you like. Tropical plants do well. You can grow them in a cold climate. We were just discussing how we went tropical last year in some of our plants, putting out small palm trees and so forth, which I brought back in for the wintertime. Great for confined spaces, great for screening. I had given my daughter a whole series of choke cherry plants to screen her off when she lived in her townhouse from her neighbor's deck, which you could literally reach out and touch if you leaned over the railing. It's inexpensive, easy to get started with. Anybody can really do it. It's very HOA friendly. And another one of my favorites is it allows you to express your creativity. So there are 4 different sections within container gardening: selecting your container, the soil mix, plant selection, maintenance, and then I always like to throw in a 5th one, and that is the creation of your container. So again, anything that holds soil and has drain holes can be a container. Most important thing is adequate drainage. I had some it's a very large pot, 2 feet in diameter. And I had which one was it that I had in there? Oh, it was a dogwood in there. I can't remember exactly which variety, but there were 2 of them. And one of them was doing extremely poorly. I decided that maybe they just needed more sunlight, pulled them out of the containers. The first one was fine. The second one I pulled out and I was just hit with a horrible smell. Well, my drain holes have become clogged. And the reason it wasn't doing well was that it was waterlogged and full of disease in the bottom of my container. It was a good test for me, a good study. I drilled out bigger holes in the bottom of those pots and made sure I didn't always have them. Make sure I had them elevated a little bit so that those holes don't become blocked with material that comes down and then onto the substrate below it. Again, and that was another good segue. Make sure you elevate it in some way that helps facilitate the draining. If you do use a tray of some type, be aware of mosquitoes. Only a few days you can have a whole flock of mosquitoes coming out of a tray. And then just some examples of drilling. And then this is one of my many ones that I have done that it was a recycled. That's actually a watering can. You can barely see it now. There's a handle up underneath here as well. The plant that was in it did extremely well. And all I did was drill holes in the bottom, and it is elevated on this little table that it's on. So when selecting a container, you need to pick something that's of course going to be right for you and right for your location and right for what you want to use it for. There are basically 3 different types of terracotta glazed and plastic containers. And you should consider the cost, the hardiness, the location, the weight, porosity of it. And I just listed some of the advantages of each one. So we were discussing with the clay pots, a lot of herbs, things that like drier roots. I love them for succulents as well, but they can be rather porous, and putting things into clay pots that might need more moisture may not be as good of solution. Although I have actually put plastic bags and I cut the bottoms out of and put those in there to essentially make them into more standard type pot. They can freeze or trip because they do absorb water. You leave them out and they're wet in the wintertime. You can get a lot of chipping in terracotta pots. Glazed, one of my favorites. The number of varieties are incredible. They're hardy, but they are heavy. They can chip as well, especially at the bottom where the glaze isn't around the drain holes. And they can be rather expensive. Plastic plants can be expensive. Unfortunately, some can look inexpensive, but a lot of the ones now are really incredible. They've made so many different varieties of plants as container gardening has exploded. And I usually use this as an anecdote earlier in the talk, but I remember reading an article, this is a number of years back, about one of the large local nurseries and how they had shifted their plants that they offer to go more towards containers and small gardens based on the shifting housing habits within Northern Virginia, where we have a lot of townhouses and a lot of smaller homes, and a lot of people are looking to put things into containers. So if you go into any place that sells plants nowadays, you'll see a huge variety that really accommodate the container gardening environment very well. And then this is one of mine. You can make a concrete. I thought it'd be really fun. I saw this online somewhere, made the mold for the concrete without really quite thinking enough, because I actually did this in my unfinished basement at the time. that container right there weighs about 200 pounds, and it actually is parked there. It has not moved. I think it has the same fern in it. It has another one, which I put up in another garden, and it's also in the same spot, and they will probably never, ever move. That one has a choke cherry. And with selecting containers, one of the things that I always have the most trouble with is trying to remember the mature size of the plant. All of us have gone out onto the patio, onto the deck after a windstorm and seen a good number of our plants blown over. And typically that's due to the fact that we have a big plant in a small pot. So remember, plants grow and pots don't. When selecting a container now, there's also a lot of other different options. You saw my images. In fact, my daughter, who's home on spring break, and I are going to go up to Leesburg on Friday and do some hunting around in some of the kind of junk stores that are there for other container options. Fabric has become quite popular. Here's a bag right there. You could see a little bit of mold and mildew and whatnot growing on the outside of this one, but I have really enjoyed those, and they're incredibly cheap. I actually grow some things in flats, even out in the garden, mostly microgreens. Cilantro I'll put in pots and continuously cycle through as the year goes on. Sometimes I'll just push seeds in every few weeks. Sometimes I'll start a whole new container. And you can see on the bottom a small salad bench, which was made, which is quite nice, somewhat modeled after mine. And actually my salad bench now is about twice as big. And again, we also discussed this before. This growing carrots in garbage cans that the tops are destroyed by rodents trying to get to our chickens' feed. And I had nothing to do with the containers. I had two small garbage cans, so I made those into containers and grow now potatoes in them and carrots. All right, number 3 on our list, or 2 on our list, soil mixtures. Typically, you want to use a soilless mixture of some kind. Garden soil gets too compact within the pots and doesn't allow any air into the media. There are 4 basics that are used: peat, sand, perlite, and vermiculite. When you look on the bags for soil mixes, I've actually lately tried to go to more non-renewable, or to more renewable, away from non-renewable, such as peat, which is an extremely slow grower, to things that are more compost, or composted pine bark, or coir, which is just the husks from coconuts, things that are essentially waste products from other avenues made into soilless mixtures. You can tailor your own. I have done this somewhat, especially for some of my taller plants. I have several trees and so forth, where I put some clay and other things to try to stabilize them, but you can make your own as well. Compost is fantastic. I'll get to this in the next slide, but most soilless mixes, unless they have some type of fertilizer added to them, really don't have much in the way of nutrients. Pine bark and so forth might have a little bit, but peat, vermiculite, perlite, the inorganic minerals, they don't have any real value or add any value back, except for adding air to your mixture and retaining some water. Compost is great because it does have all the major minor nutrients. It has good size distribution, allows it to drain, but doesn't really hold the water quite as well. I have seen recently a lot of people using a 50-50 mixture of compost with soilless mixtures, which is something that I have tried also if I have extra compost and haven't put it in my main regular garden. You can introduce slow release fertilizers into the soil, or you can water them with a water-soluble fertilizer. And again, you need to read the bag of the mixture that you have and what's gone into it. As I said, a lot of the mixtures will have a fertilizer in it and will say for the time period that they are. I have a number of trees, 5, 6, 7 trees in large pots out on my deck, and of course those trees from year to year will need to be replenished. So I actually do fertilize those with a slow release fertilizer because I can never remember to put the other fertilizers in all the time. So something to just keep those trees growing and keep the nutrient rich. And I don't know how well you can see this. looking up at the camera. But the potting mixes are all fairly similar. You can see that this one here contains a bark with it as well. But it also, I can see peat in there. It's also organic and labeled as organic. You got to remember, organic does not necessarily mean that it is renewable. And the other ones, coir peat, clay pebbles, horticultural charcoal in one that I had seen that was labeled organic. So there's a whole series of different things that can go into these things. But again, most of them, a lot of them are not really all that nutrient rich. Again, the organic does not necessarily mean renewable, and I actually use some more examples there of different things. Unfortunately, I found it hard to find everything that I want in one. Something that doesn't contains just natural products that are renewable and contains nothing else that's not renewable. It can sometimes be somewhat of a chore. You can use old soil as mix. This is probably the most asked question I have gotten. Can I use my old soil mixes? Well, one of the disadvantages is that it tends to compact over time. Now, my trees do fine in a compacted soil out there, but you do lose the ability of the soil to stay somewhat loose. It does compact. And any diseases that might have been introduced during the course of the year will also be in there. I have begun, another suggestion that I saw on a cooperative site was to use a 50-50 pot mix of that as well, new and old, which has worked out well, especially for somebody like me. I didn't mention this before. In a typical year, I have somewhere around 70 plus containers somewhere in my yard containing vegetables and flowers and perennials and other things. There are a lot of special mixes for plants that require need other properties such as succulents or cacti. I'll go into that a little bit more because I really like the succulents. I added a few slides on the end about them that I'd like to quickly go through. These all do have improved drainage properties. All right, moving on to number 3, plant selection. Anybody who is a master gardener or anybody who's listened to any master gardeners has seen this saying many, many, many times. Right plant, right place. It is a mantra of ours. And of course, it's the ability to be able to grow a plant and grow it healthy. It relies on those two things. That said, there are so many choices. I've almost not put anything into a container that hasn't grown well if I put it in the right place. You do generally want to kind of group plants with similar growing characteristics. You don't want something that's more for the shade, growing with something that's lighter, or something that wants more light, or something that likes to dry like a succulent with something that doesn't. You need to locate, of course, your plants where they can thrive. And that's the great thing about containers. Most of them are portable. And even ones like the one that I show here. I actually have a hand truck now. I've had it for a while. And a bungee cord. And I just slip it underneath and put the bungee cord around it. And I transport the plants all over without having to pick up my heavy plants and stress my body any more than I have to. Consider the mature size, which we had already talked about a little bit, and the light and water requirements that you need. For large pots, I have a maple in a pot that's about 3 feet wide. It is never going to move, so of course you need to consider that when you're locating your plant. And for those type of plants, for pots and trees, which I do like to keep outside, a number of them, the rule of thumb is that you should be, if you have one, it should be 2 hardiness zones lower than where we're at. So that would be a 9 for a lot of ours. I've even had things like a river birch in. And the problem was that we had a very warm beginning to the spring. It leafed out and we had a hard freeze. And I lost the tips of all of my river birch during that hard freeze. So even plants that should do well here, oftentimes with our weather can run into some trouble. And of course, your seasonal considerations. Don't buy pansies, expect them to make it through the summer and look pretty. Vegetables. I love growing vegetables in pots. In fact, the pot on the left, the container, is an herb garden that I made for my daughter and my son-in-law. They like to grill out a lot. They wanted something out by the grill, and this works out well. I didn't completely follow all the rules, and that I'd mix things that are a little drier with some that want a little more water. But for a limited container like this, it worked out really well. As I said before, the great thing about organic is the fewer pests. I have really never had to worry about using anything except for natural, anything natural to ward off any kind of pests or even fungus or anything on any of the pots that I've had. I can never recall having to spray anything on a plant ever. Varieties of the miniature type or bush type are generally going to be better for your containers. Beans, carrots, the pot has to be a little bit deeper. Swiss chard does great in pots. Cucumbers on a trellis or next to a fence, or I've grown it up on my deck and grown it up the railing and along the railing too. And it actually looks quite nice. Eggplants, peppers, love it. They love hot roots. Peppers and eggplants do great. Tomatoes, probably not indeterminants, but determinants do fairly good. Those are all great things to put in there. Herbs are another great one. I love putting herbs in. I grow all of our basil now in containers. Grow a number of other ones in containers as well. Cilantro, dill, things that we tend to use a little bit more of. They all do extremely well in containers. You want to plant everything that you do and all the vegetables you might do at the same time as you would with a regular garden. The one advantage is that you can start a little bit earlier if you want, if you're willing to bring the plants in and out during the warmer parts of the daytime and not let them get too cold. And probably the most important thing about growing vegetables is pretty much all of them require at least 6 hours of direct sunlight. So if you have a very shaded area, you're probably not going to be able to grow vegetables effectively. This is my favorite chart. Whoop, let's go back. This one is easily found. Just typing plant selection, vegetables, containers, and VCE or Virginia Tech or whatever. And it just gives you some helpful hints as to what vegetables to plant, the size. Typically when I plant things like carrots on the bottom there in a container, I pretty much just follow what the seed pack tells me to. And I've had very good luck with that. And then probably my favorite chart of all time is this one right here, telling you when you can plant and harvest and so forth. You can see right now that we're right in the middle of March. Not a whole lot of things going out into the garden or into containers out on the porch quite yet. We've had a lot of fairly good freezes. So they do list the last average killing frost, average last frost somewhere, from the 20th to the 30th of April, so out here somewhere. Flowering plants, another one of my favorites. Everybody wants the container that's drooping and looks fantastic. That, you take pictures of and you see in magazines and so forth. To do those, you can put almost anything that you want in there. I will use some perennials. It's harder if I mix the perennials with annuals, because any perennials that I put in pots, I eventually want to transfer out into the gardens. But these are just some to name a few. There are just so many choices out there of things that you can do. I do love bulbs, perennials, evergreens, trees. You can see some of the examples on the bottom. These are not mine, but evergreens with succulents in this case, so you would not be able to probably keep most of this out during the course of the winter, but I like the combination a lot. Just a really pretty one for spring, and just tulips in a container outside. I have really fallen in love with growing cannas in pots, and looks like some creeping Jenny, which not my favorite, but it does well in pots. And then variegated grass, maybe some heuchera around it here in this one. Let's look quite nice. So it's great, one of those pretty container pots, that you see in the magazines. You generally try to create something that's mostly symmetrical, maybe with a little bit of asymmetric balance. Tall in the center, mounted around, and then cascading over the edges, which is the thriller, filler, and spiller concept. I like this a lot. I have two fairly formal ones that I keep on my walkway, which are about 4 feet tall when I walk into the house, and those I generally actually follow this quite well with. But I also like using just about anything. I have a lot of single species in pots. Um, a lot of them that maybe one thing, and then things that you may never, associate with each other that I'll just throw together to see how it looks and what happens. Yeah, oftentimes it's good to think though about what color echoing, what color harmonies there are, the leaf shapes and textures. I have a lot of plants that I just grow for leaf. They have no flowers whatsoever, and they have great textures to them. One of my best tricks is to set it up in the garden center and imagine what it would look like when it's grown up and put it all together there. Because oftentimes things that I think are going to go together well and I put it together, that color actually doesn't really go with this color extremely well. And here's one that I like that was simple, just a caladium and some New Guinea impatiens and just some variegated ivy around the outside edges. Very simple, which looks really, really nice. I get my inspiration from many sources. Everybody's heard imitation is the highest form of flattery, so I have actually given a lot of, I love the Metal Arc Botanical Gardens. They have some really pretty setups of flowering plants. And you can see a lot of theirs are single species as well. Here's some, which is kind of a mixed grouping. And then this really, really nice one here where they've used all succulents in the setting. I've often gone out and just straight out copied plant designs that I've seen either online or in person or so forth. Maintenance. Generally you water when the first inch is dry until you wet all the way through the pot. I try to water all the way through when I water. Sometimes it's hard, especially when the plants are younger and they don't have very deep root growth. You need to water them a little bit longer. And also in our environment here, I often find outside, being as warm as we get in the summertime, so you really have to water a lot of plants every single day. And maybe even more than once a day on some that can dry out a little bit more. Fertilizer, soilless mixtures do require some supplemental nutrients of some form, such as time release or liquid fertilizer. Do remember to read the bags on any soilless mixes that you use, just to see at what kind of interval that you're going to have to fertilize at. There's a wide variety. Pruning and deadheading keeps them strong, encourages additional blooming. Especially with a lot of annuals that tend to bloom all summer long, deadheading really extends the life of the plant. Do be watchful for insect problems. Even though you get a lot fewer with containers, I had a really, really nice, fairly large ornamental pepper plant. And one of these guys, a caterpillar got on them and destroyed it. And it really did it in about a day and a half, or a day, I would think, because I water them every day. And I just came out and there was frass everywhere, and half the leaves were gone in the course of just one day. So do be mindful of insects. I put this in a little while ago on a talk I'd given on succulents, and I really enjoy succulents, and I like bringing them inside and out. The little picture up in the top right there is actually they were the wedding favors for my daughter's wedding, which are little succulents with everybody's name tag and seed assignment on them. Drainage is paramount. If you have no drainage holes, you need to be very, very careful when you water succulents. You need to be very careful also when you replant succulents. They're very sensitive to the roots. Anybody who's pulled one out has just had the root system fall apart on them, I'm sure, at one point or another. They are shallow rooted. The roots should be near the surface, so don't plant them too deeply as well. Choose a pot that's not too big. The soil must drain, and there's many commercial mixes, such as this one. This one doesn't have as much of the inorganics in it as a lot of the other ones, a lot of the minerals. This cocoa fiber does have a little bit of perlite. It has worm castings, so it does have some nutrients in it as well. But there's a wide variety of things that you can use for them. You have the options too of making your own mixes, and there are plenty of recipes online for doing so. When you water your succulents, they need water, but they don't like to sit in water. So if you have a tray underneath them, then you need to pour that tray out. You should allow them to dry out between waterings. And they also do have natural growing cycles, and I bring my succulents often in and out. A lot of them can't handle the cold weather. So in the winter months, I typically water them a little bit less as well, just to kind of get them into some of these natural cycles that they have. Avoid watering in frequent amounts. I have trouble doing this since I do water every day outside. But when you do, give it a good soaking. That promotes deeper root growth. After water, like I had said, make sure that you empty out the tray underneath. And succulents will wilt some, and they'll give you an indicator when they really need water. And again, this is the backdrop that I just showed of a beautiful succulent collection. Many survive outside in the summer months. I don't know if you could see it well, but even behind me, this one goes outside. You can see it's done some strange bolting pattern this winter. That's new to that succulent just in the last few months. It may be getting ready to flower. So start in a shaded area and gradually increase exposure to direct sunlight. This is great for any plant that you bring in. The biggest problem I always had with any trees or any other larger plants that I brought in and brought back outside, and I have a calamondin. They make these small, fairly bitter orange type fruits, which we make jelly out of. They, when you bring it out, it's really hard to keep them from getting scalded. So you need to have them in an area which is shaded first, and then bring it out slowly, essentially like hardening off before you bring them out into the direct sunlight. Some don't actually prosper succulents in direct sunlight, so you need to research, of course, your varietal. Mealybugs, scales, spider mites, so forth. You can often see those on the undersides of the leaves. A tiny bit of alcohol or insecticidal soap. You should always read the instructions of anything that you do use on your plants to make sure that it's appropriate. Acclimate to indoors as well. Avoid drastic temperature changes, like letting your plant get too cold and bring it into the warm too quick. And always check for pests. And this goes with any container that you're bringing back indoors. I have infested our house with all kinds of terrible things, not paying enough attention to what has grown in my container outside before I had brought my container back inside. And then, of course, outside, succulents are going to need more water than they ever would indoors. And finally, creation. I think it's, of course, a very important part of your container. Generally, in the bottom, you need to cover the holes with something, or else, if you've all seen it, the soilless mixture will just come out whenever you water it. Don't add a bed of rock. It's generally frowned upon. You add the bed of rock, and you put the soilless mixture on top, and it has a lot of area for water to stay trapped within the bottom there, and could lead to other problems. I put a stone in there. I did one time put a very round stone in one, which acted as a plug. So now if I put a stone in the bottom just to kind of help plug it up, it's a very irregular stone, a little bit of landscape fabric, something along those lines to block the bottom. But it still allows water to pass through your container. Sometimes, and I actually did this with those large garbage cans in the back. Now the roots were never going to go down to the bottom of that garbage can. So I actually had taken some old plastic containers, 2-liter bottles, and stoppered them up, put them on the bottom, and then just put some landscape cloth on top of that, just so the water will drain through nicely, but the soil won't get down through there as well. But then you use a little bit less of your soilless mixture, which can be kind of expensive, especially nowadays. You want to fill it near to the top for the planting depth. Arrange your plants within it, and then, of course, try to picture everything in a month and what it's all going to look like. Remove the plants, remove them from the containers that you bought them in. loosen the roots if needed be, especially if they're very, very root bound. Fill in all the gaps quite well with the soilless mixture. And I've often even found after I've watered that you see a lot of pockets, and I've gone back and refilled those. If it's not already in, put in a slow release fertilizer and then water well. Till the water actually, you'll see it come out of the bottom of the container. And then enjoy what you've managed to create. I did put this in for just some other small area gardening. I actually did this at my daughter's house for very little investment in square footage of a backyard. You can have cucumbers and other vines growing up either trellises, or I think actually we just put nails and string and put that up on her fence, and they grew up that. Any kind of climbing beans are a great choice. I love this one on the bottom center of the containers that they've put out and what they've managed to grow in those alongside their house. So there's all kinds of great methods that you can use in limited spaces to be able to grow quite a lot of vegetables and flowers. These are some of the ones that I grow every year. The upper left one is one of those containers as you walk into my back porch, which kind of follows the filler and spiller method. And you can see that that's actually Creeping Jenny in there. And it's Creeping Jenny in there because I put that in my garden once, which it took over. I realized how little I wanted it. And yet there's still some spots in my garden every year that have it, years after I've tried to remove all of it. So we actually dig a little bit of that up and put it in here. And every year a little bit more Creeping Jenny ends up in my big gardens. This maple right here in this large pot has been in that pot for 11, 12 years now, I think. You can see we do enjoy our wine, and I actually use wine corks as a kind of mulch over the top to help reduce some of the evaporation. They work quite well. These two, there's two of them on here, and you can see that the use of the fabric pots. Actually, the one on the bottom left, everything got a little too compact, and I did have some disease issues there. So this year, I'm going to space things out and grow a little bit fewer in there, have a little bit healthier plants. And then for small space, this is one of my favorites. This was my daughter's swing set. She doesn't use it anymore. She's off at school. So I've just let our grapes grow up over it. And actually, we get grapes every year and grow jelly out of it. Once when I don't get black spot. Remember to use your imagination, design your own containers, have fun with it. I think that's probably the most important part. For those of you who follow Master Gardeners, please keep in touch. There's a number of different avenues on Facebook, the Teaching Garden, Pinterest, of course our website, Master Gardeners of Prince William, mgpw.org. And if you have any questions, you can get in touch with us at the help desk, Master Gardener, at pwcgov.org. And a Master Gardener will be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. Oops.
Hi, Jeff. This is Robin. I'm going to read the questions for you.
Oh, okay. And then there's just some more of the various containers that I have.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Sprinkled everywhere. Okay.
Yeah. Be right with you.
And I do apologize if I go too fast. I have a tendency to roll downhill with my presentations. They definitely get quicker and quicker the further along that I get.
Well, you always have some great new ideas and design ideas for all of us. And we have people from Michigan here today too. So, so in the beginning, someone had mentioned that she has all of her herbs and containers on their deck for the same reason. They hate wet feet, especially the mints. Mm-hmm. And as we all know, the mints take over the yard. So that's a great idea.
Yes, they do. That is a great option.
And she also asked the question, what size pots do you use for the fingerling potatoes?
Those larger, we were discussing that a little bit before. The ones that I have in now are probably about 1.5 feet in diameter. They do tend to spread out quite a bit. I can't remember the spacing, that I put the seed potatoes in when they come. but usually 4 or 5 inches, and you want to get a decent number of potato plants in there. So generally a little bit larger container. I didn't find them go too awfully deep, which was nice with the fingerling. They do go down, but only about a foot, maybe a foot and a half. Really easy to harvest, especially in containers where you can just dig it right up super easy, rather than my garden, which is a little more compact and takes a little more work. Really easy to harvest from the container.
And Christina had mentioned that she uses potato bags for her fingerlings.
Another great option.
Well, everybody's saying hi to each other here, so Nancy wanted, hopefully everybody saw this, but Nancy wanted to mention that several garden centers this season are starting to sell peat-free mixes. Peat moss is a unsustainable practice because they're digging up peat bogs in Canada.
Yes.
So we're all trying to move away from peat-free soil mixes this year.
I have, since I do have a lot of containers and I do buy a fair amount every year, I had several years ago have completely cut peat out of anything that I buy. It is easy to find it, and even some of the bigger box stores have them as well.
Debbie asks, what do you recommend regarding reusing potting mix in containers from year to year?
Yeah, well, that's one. If there hasn't been any type of disease or anything within the plant that was in there, I've started using, it was a recommendation from one of the cooperative extension sites, a 50-50 mix. And that seems to do really, really well. I said, I have a lot of containers. I'd like to reuse what I have. So that has become a great option for me. I actually have an area in my backyard where I dump it all, and I will take that and mix half in a container and then mix half of the other mix and just mix it all in together. So that's worked really well for me so far. Kind of the best of all worlds. A little bit more inexpensive. I don't waste as much. Yet I still have all the benefits of newer soil in there.
I personally have a question. Do you add leaf grow or leaf compost at all to your mix when you're making it?
I haven't added though, but I've seen where people have. I have added just regular compost to it. I usually get a couple of truckloads of compost for the gardens and my vegetable garden every year, from the county. And I'll even say I'll save some of that, and I'll mix that in as well to the mixtures. Like I said, it has a lot of nutrients in it, and it's quite healthy for the plants.
Megan asks, any concern about plastic leaching undesirable chemicals into food crops?
I haven't had. Most of the ones I've had out there are, I'm trying to think of what kind of containers. If you are, you can go, I think, towards more the polyethylene and polypropylene, which don't use plasticizers like some of the others, other materials do. I haven't been as worried, about the phthalates and the other things that can contaminate. I know it's a big thing, especially, like my daughter having our first grandchild this year, and the containers and things that they use. And the plasticizers are everywhere. I do a lot of surface chemistry, and it's amazing on almost anything anywhere nowadays. Totally removed from it, you will find some type of a plasticizer that is leached out from a plastic. There's a thin monolayer, I think, covering the world right now. But I haven't been, and I haven't really thought about it, but that's a really good thought to think about, and perhaps do a little more research on any of the things that I do put my vegetables in, to make sure that there's something that won't have the additives in them, like a polyethylene.
And that made me think that probably some of these soil mixes have microplastic beads in them, which are starting to accumulate in our oceans. So maybe we can all do some more reading about different types of soil mixes.
Yeah, and they do a pretty good job too of describing what's on them, on their bags. Sometimes it's not the easiest thing to find. It can be rather hidden, but that is true.
Mhm.
And yeah, they had been using little beads and so forth, almost like a perlite in there to break the soil up a little bit
Yeah.
and facilitate drainage.
Alex asks, I have experienced that herbs do really well early in the season, and even though I clip off the flowers, they all struggle through the summer. Any suggestions?
It depends on the ones that you grow. I mean, we do too. I mean, like things like basil and so forth tend to flower, and sometimes tend to bolt on you. And especially things like cilantro, which we like quite a bit. And my solution on a lot of those is that I continually plant as we go through the season, up to a point where you're not going to get any return off of them. Sometimes I'll just stick more seeds in and then let those come up with in between. And then once they start growing and the other ones are not looking as good, and that, like I said, that particularly happens with cilantro. I'll just cut it back and let those take over, and I'll replant other ones as well. And then some of the herbs just have, the annual herbs just have a limited lifetime in pots. Other things should do fairly well that are perennial. Sage and rosemary, thyme, those kind of things you probably don't have as many problems with, but the more annual ones you do. So I do plant more seeds as the year goes on.
And at the teaching garden, the cilantro reseeds itself all season.
Mm-hmm.
And Nancy had mentioned also successful succession planting.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the presentation is being recorded and will be on our YouTube channel. What is your favorite low-cost product for the bottom of pots to ensure drainage? And Nancy had mentioned to me that we've had a couple of garden myth articles about putting stones, not to put stones in the bottom of your pots, because that raises the water level up to the roots and it can encourage bacterial
Yes.
rot of your roots. So I'll let you answer that question.
Yeah, if I put stones down there, I put a stone.
Yeah.
Just an irregular stone to block the water from going through. I've also used landscape fabric. I do have some landscape fabric that I put under stone paths and so forth. Otherwise, the stones just sink into the ground, and my dog has worn all kinds of paths through my yard. So rather than invest in a lot of stone continuously, I have put those down, and it's done well. And I actually have some that I use in the gardens. I've actually started growing my zucchini within landscape fabric. It's permeable and keeps plants a little bit warmer, and keeps a lot of the other moisture from the ground coming up. And I've had a lot better luck with that with planting. So I do keep some around, and I'll put some of that over the holes as well. And that does quite well also, as long as it's nice and permeable, water permeable, not a solid sheet, but something that is woven.
And I've seen people put plastic bottles at the bottom of their pots, and I do believe that probably would raise the water could raise the water table as well, making your plants more susceptible to root rot.
The only ones I've done that on are containers that are like those garbage cans, where I know there's no chance the roots are ever going to get down to the bottoms of there, and I didn't want to fill them all the way up. And on those, I put landscape fabric over the top of that, so that and kind of tucked it up so that the soil sits on there, and if it goes through, it just immediately drains, and none of the soil ends up around any of that. And that's worked well, because I have had containers where I have emptied them, and you can smell the root rot and the bacteria doing its thing down at the bottoms of the containers. So yeah, I don't add any fillers generally to the bottoms of anything that I do. I just generally solely want to cover that hole enough that it drains, but still allows. That's it, just so it drains.
Is there a good way to water plants to keep them alive when you're away on vacation, say 3 weeks? And I'm just going to add before you say, I have a kiddie pool that I bought that I reuse every year, and I put mine patio plants in the kiddie pool and then let the rain water from the bottom. But I'm sure you have
a good idea.
A suggestion too.
I haven't found a good way yet. Now I have way too many. So we generally hire a neighborhood kid to come over and water for us. That I haven't found a good way to do it. I have tried some of those watering devices that you can put in. I haven't had the best of luck with those. So I'd have to say, as of yet, I haven't. And we actually get somebody, one of the neighborhood kids, to come over and do it for us. So that's our it's been my only solution. And since I have so many, I always plan ahead, try to make sure somebody's going to be around. If not, my cousin who lives 4 miles away.
Can you reuse grow bags? And if so, how do you clean them?
I haven't done a whole lot in grow bags, but I do reuse a lot of my pots. And depending on the fabric, I've often made up just a very dilute bleach solution to clean my pots. I spray it on and then just hose that off. And I've also used before kind of a 50-50 solution of like rubbing alcohol as well, which does a nice job and evaporates. Or you could even just scrub them down with soap and water as well to clean them out. I mean, you want to make sure that you don't leave any disease behind from the previous year. I reuse all of my containers pretty much every year, and I always clean them out. And I've actually used all 3 of those different methods before. Sometimes I make up the bleach because I've got some cages that I use for my tomatoes, and I've had a lot of tomato disease issues. So I often spray my containers with a dilute bleach solution every year. Put on some clothes I don't care about, and go out the backyard away from things.
What concentration bleach solution do you make? Is that a 10% or 1 part to 9 parts?
Yeah, 5% or less generally.
Okay. Megan mentioned coffee filters at the bottom of pots have worked well for her.
That was one I'd heard before, which was an excellent idea. Yeah, that's a great one.
Beverly asks, what is the purple flower with the creeping Jenny?
I think that was a Angelina, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Angelonia, I think, yeah.
Angelinia, that's it. I think that's what that is. A beautiful flower. It grows for quite a long period of time. I'll put a lot of annuals in those type of pots. The one up on the screen right now, geraniums have done really well there. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of creeping Jenny. That caused us a lot of heartache. That was actually before I became Master Gardener. It was just that, hey, this looks nice. But boy, it took over such a large area. It was growing up the plants. It was very difficult to get rid of. And there is still some, I find, every year.
We don't recommend it anymore. I'm dealing with it too, Jeff.
Yeah, I would never recommend it. I see people putting it in their front yards, and then I'll drive by a few years later. It's everywhere. It's in their yard. It's very aggressive. But the little bit that I have left now, that saves me a little bit of money for my my spillers.
Well, it will also grow long down from the pot. And then if you have that near your yard, the soil, it'll root. A vinca vine will do that too. Ashley asks, what containers can you use for blueberries and raspberries, and where can I find ones big enough?
You can find containers almost anywhere, especially with being online. You can find them almost anywhere. I had some of my blueberries in pots for a while, and they were just standard plastic pots. I think mine were about 1.5 feet in diameter or so. I find with a lot of the fruiting shrubs and so forth, you need a decent amount of space. You don't want to let them get root bound. They've become very root bound. I've transferred those back out to the garden. I've had some small bush cherries and other things that I've done that with. But I like having them around in containers. and I like the look of the blueberries as well. So I think I would probably head online to try to find something. I don't need anything too fancy. I would keep something, probably though, you're gonna need something that can overwinter outside. So you're not typically not something that's you know, a terracotta or a glazed pot or something. All of my ones that I keep outside for longer periods of time are a plastic pot of some sort in general. Something that's not going to deform when it freezes inside, or the pot won't deteriorate from the cold, crack.
And then Nancy and Christina wanted us to remind you that you will be receiving an email with an evaluation link to this recording, and the video link will be coming with it. Nancy mentions on April 13th, we will have a container gardening with natives at 11 a.m. Go to the Prince William County website, Virginia Cooperative Extension, to register, and we will be advertising that.
The link is in the chat too for registration.
Okay. Is organic raised bed soil all right for growing plants in pots? Can you please explain the positive and negative for using this versus potting soil? Or so
in
that's
general, it's mostly, from what I understand, it's drainage. It's the soils that are used in, you know, that you can buy to put into gardens do not have as good of drainage as you might want in a container. And that, as far as I can tell, has been the key reason that it has been discouraged in using more soilless mixes when you do some container gardening. That said, you know, like with compost or other things, you know, creating mixtures of them with things that do drain a little bit better probably wouldn't harm the plants at all. I say with that large tree in the picture that I have there, it's been in there for a long time. The soil's pretty compact. It's doing all right, but maybe not as healthy as it could. But it's kind of as large as I want it to grow, anyways. But yeah, in general, it's mostly the drainage issues. It stays wet too long and doesn't allow enough air to get into you know, around the roots.
Jennifer mentions or asks, can you treat the bagged potting mix in any way before using it? She used a name brand one last year and found lots of grubs and mildew in the mix.
Oh, I haven't treated it. I haven't had that issue. That's too bad. I haven't seen that before. I'm not exactly sure how to treat it, whether you would spread it out. Nancy, you have any ideas?
You know, if you leave it open, you're going to get stuff inside, and you leave it outside. But I would just be cautious about purchasing a quality product. You know, smell it, take a look at it, how it crumbles. Is it going to filter water through quickly enough? And so I think just being a good consumer and also not leaving the bag open outside, that's for moisture and insects to get in.
And if you open it and there's grubs in it and mildew, I would return it. I return something. Yeah, I would, and just say I would like my money back.
April, I'm just going to answer this one real quick. I don't know if you're in Virginia, but the Morton Arboretum or Missouri Botanical Gardens has a really good source of plants in their mature size, their width, their height, soil conditions, and I generally use that even though I'm in Virginia. Plant Nova Natives for native plants is a good source.
Chris asks, what's the cheapest way to get lots of potting medium?
A bulk. Typically, the bigger the bag, the cheaper it is. So I buy large bags typically for the stuff I use, and then I started using half and half mixtures to reduce my costs as well. Adding compost, which I buy in bulk, helps reduce my costs also. So I use all three of those methods to try to cut back on how much it's going to cost me, because typically the plants and other things, and then also a lot of the plants that I use in my containers, I grow myself in the basement early and put out. So typically it is my most expensive part, since my containers typically they last for many years, is replenishing with the growing material. So I use those three things to kind of increase my or decrease the cost every year.
And Nancy put the location of the Prince William County compost facility for those looking to get a truckload.
And Free State does sell their compost by the bag too, at the Ballsford Road compost facility.
Oh, they do now? Oh.
Mm-hmm. Renee mentioned.
I usually just bring my truck in and get a load.
Suggestions on soil for, I'm sorry, Sissy, Arboquina, Olive Tree, and Savannah Zone 8. I guess I'm going to say contact your extension office for Savannah, but Jeff may have.
I would have to research that one. I mean, olives kind of grow in different soils.
Yeah.
It's generally a little bit more rocky and well drained, so I would have to research that before I put it in. And there are plants that I look at before I put them in as to what kind of things that they like, if they're out of the ordinary, anyways, and do a little bit of research into what type of soils they have and try to tailor my mixes or whatever I put in there towards those. So yeah, I would recommend that as well.
Sandra asked, sorry.
Let's just do the one more question, Robin, about the fertilizing.
Okay. I don't see it yet, but are you looking at it? Can you read it?
Oh, sure. Susie Bessicker wants to know about what ratio for vegetable fertilization. How often?
How often? So I typically only look at what's on the bag for those. And on the containers for whatever fertilizer that I'm using. Some things though don't like to be continuously fertilized, like tomatoes and so forth. So what I often do for just like a regular herb or whatever, which is a more ubiquitous thing, if it doesn't have fertilizer in it already, I will use some type of slowly release fertilizer in it. If it's something else like a tomato or something that doesn't really want a huge amount of fertilizer, I'll often go to the IPM, the Plant Management Guide, and look at when they fertilize things, and then fertilize during those time periods. Also, like I said, with a lot of the soilless mixes, almost all of them nowadays seem to have some type of fertilizer put in there. So you also have to take that into account. A little more difficult doing any kind of fertilizing actually in containers, I find, than it is in my garden, where oftentimes, they want you to use some type of, either fertilizer when you first start or at first bud break or whatever, versus containers. And number one, almost all of them do have something in it. So when you first make it up, it's going to have some in it. So I said I have generally mostly just followed whatever's on the bag in terms of what it suggests for the potted plants.
But also
anything else?
They market bloom extending fertilizers at the garden stores that have a different NPK than a vegetable. Yeah, so you should read the label and ask at the desk, which is best for what kind of plant.
Yeah, like with a lot of those, you put too much fertilizer on tomatoes with too high nitrogen. You get a lot of really pretty foliage and maybe not as much fruit as you would like.
Right.
Whereas you use that with a leafy vegetable, you get a lot more leafy vegetable.
Thank you so much, Jeff. There's a lot of great comments. Please, everybody, fill out the evaluation when you get the link. That really does help us. And this will be posted later on this week or the beginning of next week on our YouTube channel. You can find that by Googling VCE-Prince William YouTube. Thank you for coming, and we'll hopefully see you next week.
Thanks, Jeff.
Sure,
Thank you, Jeff. Excellent job.
Thank you so much.
If you're thinking about getting your lawn in order this spring, you may consider this program from VCE-Prince William, Best Lawns. Best Lawns involves a master gardener coming out, measuring and sampling your yard, evaluating it for weeds. When the soil test results come back, we give you a customized nutrient plan along with control recommendations and other cultural controls that would be beneficial for your lawn. If you're interested, please contact Natalie Walker at pwcgov.org. If you enjoyed this video, please contact us with your questions, comments, and suggestions at mastergardener@pwcgov.org. Also, if you were sent an evaluation for this class, please fill it out and return it to us. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.